Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of Tanner Talks. There's been a really big gap, obviously, and I think, I started a podcast at the worst possible time because when I started this, it was like during finals, and it just wasn't practical. But it is currently it is currently January 17th of 2020. And as I'm sitting here in this very makeshift studio in my basement, you could see this pair of cymbals right next to me. It is a very makeshift studio in my basement, as I try and mute that after I just did that. That's terrible. I want to try and pick this back up. This is going to be my last semester at college coming up here, and I want to try and do this again for my final semester. So I thought when would be a better time to start that, to hold myself accountable for that, but then before I actually get back into all my schoolwork and do an episode right here while I'm still at home before I actually go back to school. So, here we are. I actually recorded an episode a while back, but I ended up scrapping it because I just didn't like the way it turned out. But I'm back, and I want to try and do this time. So, today, we are going to be talking about our first MMA show that we're going to do. And we are obviously going to be talking about the Conor McGregor versus Cowboy Cerrone UFC 246 that is happening tomorrow. Well, at least as the day of recording and hopefully posting this tomorrow. But tomorrow meaning January 18th, 2020, and it is happening at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. And this is... Well, okay. First, I want to start by explaining why I'm talking about MMA. I got into MMA. I guess you could call me a Conor fan. I was brought in around the Conor era. I discovered MMA. I don't remember exactly when, my first event that I watched was. I don't remember when, I really got myself into it. I remember I became a casual fan around 2014, 2015. I specifically remember watching the John Jones OSP fight. I remember watching the Cowboy versus Cowboy fight actually on Fox. Cowboy Oliveira versus Cowboy Cerrone. Those are some of the oldest fights that I remember going out of my way to watch them happen live. And then around 2017 was when I would say I took my fandom up a notch and became really more of a hardcore fan. And kind of since then, it's just been a slow rise up and up. Just taking in more and more content each and every week, doing more and more research, watching more and more fights really whenever I can, to now where it's at the point where, I never miss a pay-per-view. I never miss a fight night really, unless it's one of those 5 a.m. China cards where there's one fight on the card that matters and the rest of them don't matter. Those don't really count, and we all know that. But I'm an avid fight fan. I love Bellator too. A good Bellator event every once in a while is great. In terms of being a fan, I would say I'm a legit hardcore fan as of this point. But I will not sit here and try and lie to you and say that I've been a hardcore fan for a long time. It's probably only 2017 would be 3 years now. So it is what it is. But this is what I'm here to talk to you about today. Conor-Cowboy. So here's my thing. And, I mean, when you look at this fight, I think well, first of all, the amount of just media that I have consumed this week for this fight is ridiculous. Let me try and I've watched all the embeddeds so far, obviously. I always watch the embeddeds for every single pay-per-view. I've watched Below the Belt with Brendan Schaub. I've watched I can't even tell you how much Luke Thomas stuff I've watched this week. Just the amount of stuff that I have watched and consumed this week regarding this fight is stupid, really. But just kind of wrapping my head around all that's been said and all that's been talked about this week, I've come up with a couple of the biggest misconceptions in my mind about this fight. And when I think about those biggest misconceptions, I think the first one that comes to mind is that Conor has no ground game. There's this kind of idea going around that if Cowboy wanted to, he could go in there and take Conor down and just absolutely steamroll him. And this is an idea that I'm not the first to say that this is a huge misconception, but this to me stands out more among the rest of them. And I think that it's crazy because, well, okay, one of the things that I watched Undisputed, the FS1 show with Skip and Shannon. I watched their very last segment today was talking about Conor-Cowboy. First of all, Shannon said Conor is trying to fight Jose Masvidal. So this is why I love watching mainstream media people talk about UFC and MMA, because it's so obvious that they have absolutely no idea what they are talking about. No clue. And you have to give them props because they do try. And with something like Conor McGregor, it's easy to forget if you are a true like hardcore fan. It's easy to forget that Conor McGregor is not only one of the biggest not only is he the biggest star in the UFC and in the history of the UFC and in the history of the sport of mixed martial arts, he is also one of the biggest stars in all of sports and in all of entertainment for that matter too. So it's easy to forget that if you're really just within the MMA bubble, I feel like, because we don't interact with people outside of that bubble that much. And you forget what that mindset's like. You forget that other people don't know everything about these things. That's why I do this podcast, because the people around me, the people that are my friends, they don't follow this sport the way I follow this sport. And I wanted somewhere to talk about this because I love talking about this sport. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm sat in my basement right now talking to a camera. But it's easy for us to forget that. So when you hear these mainstream media people try and give their best attempt at a breakdown of the fight and what we think we're going to see, it's going to get really oversimplified into things like Conor, of course, is always going to be known for his striking. And then when you think of a guy only for his striking, you tend to forget that he can actually do other things. Cowboy, he's a great wrestler. He's great on the ground. He's great grappling. Okay. And this is a thing, especially when you're looking at a guy who is known as a striker, like Conor. Whenever they're fighting anybody else, if that opponent has a reputable ground game, this is always a conversation that's going to come up. Always. You're always going to get this, oh, but what if he takes him down? Can he survive that? You're always going to get that. And the thing is, it's a valid point. This is what made the Conor-Khabib fight so interesting. Conor is a striker, yes. Khabib, not a striker. A wrestler, a true wrestler. But we have these two extremes that we don't look at the other half. Khabib caught Conor and knocked him down with a punch. Now, you could say it was a lucky punch, sure. Sure, you could say that any punch is a lucky punch if it lands right. Conor also did a great job in some of his takedown defenses. Got out of a couple takedown attempts from Khabib. So when you have these two opposites, it's always this same conversation. The other thing is, nobody wants to give Conor credit for his ground game. And I think that would be a bit different if we had examples in the past of Conor showing this greatness on the ground. You know, we don't. There's not a ton from his fights where he does that much on the ground because he's usually always knocking opponents out or TKOing opponents or doing whatever it is that Conor McGregor does to get his wins. But if you look at it, though, you have evidence that shows that Conor McGregor can be fine on the ground. His main jiu-jitsu partner is Dylan Dennis. Dylan Dennis is a world-class jiu-jitsu practitioner. And when you have a guy like Dylan Dennis telling you that Conor McGregor is good on the ground, we have training footage. I mean, when he's rolling around, it does not look like he does not know what he's doing. Now, I, again, in the spirit of honesty, need to tell you that it's not like I know what I'm looking for. But, you know, I also know that I'm not seeing a guy who's completely clueless. So to wrap up this point, this idea that Conor has no ground game, he can't wrestle, and if Cowboy wants to, he could just take him to the ground and steamroll him, I'm not buying that. And Cowboy himself has said that. He was asked at a press conference yesterday, hey, are you going to take him down? And his response was, first of all, guys, he said it pretty much what I just said. He said this idea that Conor has no ground game is ridiculous, and if you think that, you're prepared to lose. So I'm actually really glad that Cowboy thinks that because, you know, it's smart. It's not thinking of your opponent as just this one-dimensional person who has this massive flaw that you think you can expose. That's fine if you want to think that, but I'm glad that he is pointing out, like, hey, this is kind of a ridiculous idea. And, you know, he said kind of one of the comments that has, like, captured a lot of attention so far is he was asked, are you going to take him down? And he said, I probably should, but I don't know if I will, just because he wants to have this slugfest. So I think that kind of takes us into, I mean, I had written down another point that was a big talking point is that Conor only has a left hand. That was something that one of Cowboy's coaches said. I think that we've kind of moved past that at this point. Like, you know, Cowboy talking in the press conference yesterday, we know that that's not what he thinks just because of what his comments, you know, what he said. And what I just told you again was that, you know, Cowboy said, like, hey, to think that this guy doesn't have a ground game and to think that I can just roll over him like that is ridiculous. So I think we're kind of past that point. But, you know, Ariel did a good breakdown of this, not breakdown, but just talking about this point where, you know, yeah, you could say, of course, his left hand is his biggest weapon, but you have to have so many other tools to be able to set up that left hand that to say that that left hand is the only thing is just absolutely ridiculous. So, but when Cowboy said that quote about, I should take him down, but I don't know if I will, I think that's kind of a good transition into my next point here, which is about the buildup of this fight. Now, this feels different, am I wrong, than some other big UFC cards, especially Conor McGregor cards. And what I mean by that is there's usually this tangible feeling for fans where when there's a big card coming, especially a Conor McGregor card, you have this sort of excitement all week, and it's like tangible. And I've never been to a UFC event, but I can only imagine how tangible that must be when you're in Vegas that week for fight week, or wherever else the fight may be. But of course, Vegas is usually more of an event throughout the whole week. So for me, on Monday, early in the week, I wasn't like, oh yeah, like let's go. I just wasn't quite feeling it yet. As I sit here on Friday, I'm talking to this camera right now, and I'm watching the UFC ceremonial weigh-ins as we speak. I could say now I'm feeling it more. With the amount of content this week that I already have talked about how much I watched. This is something that I feel the excitement for now, but I'm not sure that it has as big of a feel as it was meant to. And I know that I'm not the only one that feels that way. I've heard other, reporters talking about this. There was an Ariel and the Bad Guy with Chael Sonnen, where they were talking about, let's see how many Irish fans show up for the ceremonial weigh-ins and the fight, because that's a great indicator of what the sort of hype level is about this fight. And so we're going to see that momentarily here. But I think we're in a better place now than we were at the start of the week. And UFC and ESPN have done a tremendous job of promoting this card. They took full advantage of the fact that that UFC is part of ESPN now, and ESPN has the National College Championship, which I didn't look at the ratings for, but can only imagine it was in the many tens of millions. And there were many commercials that ran during that. So the promotion was there, but I just didn't know if the feeling was there. I think one of the reasons about that is the card. The rest of the card is, it's not what you would exactly hope for. Brendan Schaub has talked a lot about this, where for a Conor McGregor card, this is not what you would typically expect. And especially for this really special event, we haven't had a UFC event in like almost a month now. And this is the first one of 2020. So you would expect that this was going to be a stacked card and they were going to kick off, 2020 with a huge bang. But that's just not the case. Let's go over the card here. We have kicking off the main card is Anthony Pettis versus Diego Ferreira. Anthony Pettis, one of my personal favorite fighters. That is the other fight on this card that I'm most excited about, just because Anthony Pettis is one of my favorite fighters. Diego Ferreira is on a 5-fight win streak, the most of any fighter on this card. So I think that is a very fun one to watch. The second fight on the card, as typical to any pay-per-view card, is going to be two newer fighters that they're trying to promote. That first fight on the card is always going to be, a more well-known fighter, because they want to kick off the card with like, oh yeah, like, it's this guy and he's going to do this, and this fight went really well. They want to start with like, if you're going to compare it to fireworks, they want to start with like, sparklers, something that's fun for everyone. The second fight on the card, I couldn't even pretend to know that I have heard of either of these guys. It's Brian Kelleher versus, I'm going to screw this guy's name up, but Ode Osborne. Couldn't even pretend to tell you that I have heard of either of them. But like I said, it's typical. So, we'll watch it, and I'm sure it'll be a fun fight, and maybe one of them will break out, and we'll have something on our hands. Third fight on the card, Alexei Olenek versus Maurice Green. Alexei Olenek is the first UFC fighter to have fought in 4 different decades now. He's fought in the 90s, the 2000s, 2010s, and now the 20s. And then co-main event, Holly Holm versus Raquel Pennington. And, that'll be a fun one. Holly Holm is always fun to watch. And I think, Raquel Pennington has done a great job in her past couple fights. And then we have our main event of Conor McGregor versus Donald Cerrone. Am I crazy? Are they missing the Macy Barber fight on here? Macy Barber and Roxanne Modafferi. Unless, is that the prelim? Oh, okay. I'm not crazy. I just did not realize. The prelims are actually pretty dope. Prelims are pretty dope. Watch the prelims. Andre Fili, Sodiq Youssef. That's a really, really interesting fight. And then Macy Barber, Roxanne Modafferi is the headline of the prelims. But okay, so let's compare that though to the UFC 229 card, which was the last card that Conor McGregor fought on. So let's run down that card. Kicking it off, Michelle Waterson, Felice Herrig, fun fight. Derek Lewis, Alexander Volkov, ridiculous knockout, one of the scariest knockouts I've ever seen by Derek Lewis, and it was like with 10 seconds left. 4:48, so 12 seconds left in the fight. And of course, Derek Lewis goes on to do the interview with Joe Rogan and becomes internet famous after that, and launches himself into stardom among the outside fans. OSP versus Dominic Reyes. Fun fight. Dominic Reyes gets a good win, a decision win, and of course now he is on track to fight John Jones. Anthony Pettis, Tony Ferguson for the co-main event, fight of the night. Tony Ferguson gets his return victory. There's blood everywhere. John Anik gets literally showered in blood and auctions off his shirt afterwards. I mean, a ridiculously fun fight. And then we get all the madness that was Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor as the main event. And I mean, okay, even in the prelims, Sergio Pettis was, the headliner of. I mean, it's just one of the most stacked cards, even if you look at it now, and just compared to this card that we have now with Conor McGregor, it just doesn't hold up to that same sort of level that you would expect. And maybe that's because this card wasn't even supposed to be a card. They made this just because Conor McGregor wanted to return. So they made this event just for him. Another thing with the build-up, at the press conference, how did we feel about the very buddy-buddy type relationship that they seem to have. I know some people are okay with it. Some people hate it. Some people are confused by it. Here's my thoughts. It makes sense. And it's probably what we needed. Conor McGregor, of course, had a terrible 2019. I think my camera just died on me. Hang on here. Okay. Apologies for that. I am back now. The camera shut off on me. I think it went into auto power off because I've been talking for a while. Made some adjustments on that, but we are back. It should not shut off again, hopefully. And actually, while I was on the break, I got to watch Conor McGregor weigh in at the ceremonial weigh-ins. And then, Joe Rogan talks with Cowboy, talks with Conor. There were a lot of Olay chants. The crowd went crazy at the face-off. Conor got very much all up in his face. It was pretty awesome. I cannot lie. But we are back. Anyway, what we were talking about is the buildup of this fight, and why it feels different, and how Conor was being all very buddy-buddy with Cowboy at the press conference. And, I was talking about it. I liked it, and I think it was what we needed. It's very different than what we've ever seen from Conor before. This is a man who made his fame off of his press conferences. And the reason why it was what we needed, this is what I mean by that. What I was saying before the audio cut out was Conor McGregor had a terrible 2019. And a lot of that stemmed from his Khabib fight, where he took a lot of heat for the way he acted during those press conferences and the things that he said to Khabib during those press conferences. A lot of heat. And I'm talking about people on Twitter that don't have the first clue about anything about MMA or anything about Conor McGregor were tweeting about how they were happy that he lost that fight because of, the things that they had seen and the things that they had seen that Conor had said in those press conferences. The whole comments about Khabib's religion and his wife and stuff like that. So when the world was watching this time around, you better believe that the world's biggest superstar, or MMA's biggest superstar, is gonna, mind his manners a little bit more this time. This is what we needed. We needed Conor to come out this way. If he came out guns a-blazing, no pun intended for Cowboy, but if he came out like that, I just don't see how that would have helped this fight, helped build this fight. I don't see why that would have helped. Now, the interesting thing about this is if Conor wins in his next fight, do we see him go back to that? Do we see him go back to his typical ways in press conferences? Do we see him go back to stealing Aldo's belt? Go back to, those so quotable disses that he's thrown out in the past? The other thing that's interesting is, and both fighters have made this very clear, is that there is no bad blood between the two. This is a fan favorite bout. Um, it's really it's similar to the BMF title with Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz, where the fans made that bout. There was no bad blood between the two. They just both identified each other as the two baddest motherfuckers in that division and wanted to fight each other, and then the fans made it happen. This is somewhat similar, not quite to the same level where, I think had this fight happened probably 5 years ago or so when this whole thing kind of started at the 2015 press conference, where they kind of had that first initial exchange. If this had happened, if this fight had been made when they first started kind of going at each other, first of all, it would have been way different. The press conference would have been a classic Conor press conference, and we would have gotten two fighters heated at each other. But I think the reason that a lot of this is lost is because it took so long for this fight to get made, where it's like, yeah, this is a dope fight and this is, it's going to be badass and everything. But a lot of the reason that that hype is kind of gone is because it took us so long to get here. And so I think where we're at now is we get this sort of buddy-buddy, and Conor has to do a little bit of damage control and make sure that he's minding his manners in these press conferences. So I think this is probably what was needed. Honestly, I thought it was kind of refreshing. I thought it was nice that we saw Conor going out there and he's acting humble. And of course, this is not the first time he's shown this attitude. If you watch the Ariel Helwani interview, whether it was the one back in August where he was breaking his silence and they did the thing on ESPN where they were talking for like an hour or something. If you watch that one, we see the beginning of this new attitude. If you watch the Ariel interview that aired last week, we see this attitude, and they talk about this attitude, and they talk about it to a high degree, and it's covered. And I do think that it is refreshing, but I think the most interesting thing about this is what do we see next? Do we see him go back to what it was? And I think that's just going to depend on the opponent. If he gets that Khabib rematch, is there anybody that could picture him talking the way that he's talking to Cowboy to Khabib? Can anybody picture Khabib gets on stage, Conor's on stage, and both of them are like, "Oh yeah, man, I like your coat." He threw a dolly through the window of a bus to try and attack this man. I don't think it's possible. Khabib literally flew like an eagle out of the cage after neck cranking Conor to a submission, flew out of the cage like an eagle, and attacked Conor's team. I just can't see any way in which, they both get on stage and they're like, "Oh, yeah, hey, man, how's it going? Much respect. Much respect. I'm glad to see you, much respect. I think I'm going to beat you, but much respect." I just don't think that's possible. In no situation can I ever imagine that would happen. So, but again, I think it's going to depend on the opponent. I think one of the things that it's definitely talked about, but it's not talked about enough, is how much of a must-win this is for Conor in this fight. His entire career's reputation rests on this fight. If he loses, where the hell does he go? You've always got that Nate Diaz trilogy, but honestly, if Conor loses, I can't imagine that Nate Diaz would be like that interested in it, especially given, Nate's tendencies to, disappear for years at a time, and, his differences that he has with the UFC. He's kind of said after the Jorge fight that, like, hey, I'm going to go away a while for again. He kind of outright said that almost. So there's that. Conor said that he wants Jorge. He wants Kamaru just because he wants that 170 title. He wants the 155-pound title. And he wants a boxing world title. Those are all great things, and those are all huge goals and ambitions to go for. But if he loses this fight to Cowboy Cerrone, I can't imagine you would get of those 3 MMA fights, Jorge, Kamaru, or Khabib. If he were to lose, I think the only one that you could like possibly justify would be Jorge, because you can't give Conor a title shot after a loss. At either division, it makes no sense. There's no way you could justify that. So the only thing that would make sense is the Jorge fight, and that's just because Jorge has said that he wants that fight, and Conor said he's interested in it too. But to be honest, if he loses the Cowboy, I mean, do people want to see that fight? I mean, Jorge's flat out said, yeah, he wants the Conor fight because he knows it'll make him a lot of money. Conor wants the fight, I think, because he wants that belt. I know because he wants that belt. But again, if he were to lose to Cowboy, does that make sense? I think if he were to lose, the only thing out of the options that he's laid out would be to go after a boxing world title. Go back to boxing. Hey, MMA is not really working out for you lately, is it? Maybe it's time to jump ship. Do this boxing thing that you grew up with, that you started, your career with. You fought the best ever. Maybe you could fight somebody else, get that title, and then maybe come back in a year or two. I don't know. That's a mess. Personally, I'll tell y'all, that's why I want Conor to win. Because if Conor wins, we got the door is wide open on all those things. If Conor loses, the door's like cracked open on one of them and shut on the rest. So, all right. The last thing that I want to talk about with this is my biggest controversial opinion on this whole ordeal. And that is kind of talking about what we were just talking about. If Conor were to lose and Donald Cowboy Cerrone, the most winningest fighter in UFC history, were to beat him and become 37-13 as his official record. If that were to be the case, but Conor McGregor wants to continue fighting, should he consider switching camps to somewhere else? He's trained at SBG Ireland with head coach John Kavanagh, striking coach Owen Roddy, for his whole career. A lot of people give him credit for building that gym. Obviously, when you're the biggest superstar in the sport, yeah, your gym's going to be one of the most popular gyms. But, here's my thing, though. If Conor were to lose, and he wants to continue fighting, should he switch to a different camp? Now, here's my thought. It's not that I think, the camp is the problem. It's not that I think that he's not getting, the coaching that he so needs. Or let me rephrase that. It's not that I don't think that SBG Ireland is a good gym and capable of coaching a high-level star. They have. Conor McGregor's the two-time champion, or the two-division champion, rather. And and he's the first one to ever do it. You know, it's not that they're incapable of coaching a champion. We've seen them do it. But here's the thing. If you listen to the interviews and you hear the way that they talk about him, Luke Thomas, this has been the number one quote that stuck out with me all week this week, throughout this whole fight buildup. This is the number one thing that stuck out with me. Luke Thomas said the people around him, his fight camp, they talk about Conor as if he's some sort of dictator. And it's true. If you listen to the things that they say, John Kavanaugh had a comment in a Mac Life interview that was heavily scrutinized and overanalyzed and whatnot, where he said Conor has a higher fight IQ than all of us, and we just sit back and we let him run camp, and whatever he thinks is best, and we try and get out of his way. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing there, but when you hear stuff like that, and then you hear Dylan Dana says like, "Oh yeah, he's like one of the best jiu-jitsu people I've ever rolled with," and just his whole camp. It's true. Listen to the way that they talk about him. It's crazy. It is crazy the way that they talk about him. So my thought with this is, would it benefit him to go somewhere that will treat him a different way? Again, it's not that I don't think that SBG Ireland is the right answer, but I'm thinking maybe at this point, if you want to keep fighting, but you want to really like start over and you want to look at, he's talked about he wants to look at this like a season, maybe going somewhere else where they, will treat you like an actual student of the game, like you're supposed to be treated. Maybe that is the answer. Someone like Duke Rufus or, I don't know, John Winkle, I don't know. But I was on ESPN radio when Ariel Helwani did his post-press conference live show, and I called in and I was on that show, and I asked him that question, and he laughed it off, essentially. And, he was like, that's crazy. The one thing that stands out to me the most about Conor McGregor is, since I first interviewed him, was his loyalty, and I don't think I could ever imagine him leaving that camp. And, of course, when you're on those radio shows, you get hung up. You don't really get to respond to what their response is to your question. But if I were able to, I every point that Ariel brought up was fine, but it kind of didn't answer my question. I was asking, not do you think he would leave, but do you think he should leave? And that's different. Do I think he would leave SBG Ireland? No. I'd like 99% chance, no, he does not leave. 99.9% chance, no, he does not leave. Do I think he should leave if he were to lose? Yeah, maybe I think it wouldn't be a bad option. I think maybe, hey, you haven't won since 2016, so, what are we doing here? Eventually, a change might be what you need. That's all I'm saying. That's my biggest controversial opinion. Wrapping this up, though, I hope that that's not the case. I hope that he doesn't lose, and I hope he doesn't have to leave. But, we'll find out tomorrow. Both guys seem fired up. Cowboy keeps talking about he wants to blow the roof off the place. I think they will. Here's what I hope. I hope we make it to round 3, just because, and I kind of hope that for every fight. I'm a fan of, I want to see them actually fight a little bit. Those 10-second knockouts, they're fun. But did you really get to see the full potential of the matchup? No, you didn't. And that's an argument for a different day. But I hope that we can make it to round 3. I would like to see a round 3 Conor McGregor knockout. And then we'll get the notorious one back on track. Like I said, if he wins, so many doors open for him. If Cowboy wins, adds another feather to his cap. Pun intended that time, but we'll find out. UFC 246 is tomorrow. Thank you guys for listening. I hope to, get back on track with this, like I said earlier. So I'm excited. If you hated this, if you're still actually listening, first of all, thank you for actually listening all the way to the end. If you hated this, let me know. If you loved it, let me know. If you were somewhere in the middle, let me know. If you have any thoughts, comments, feedback, whatever, please leave a comment below. Like and subscribe if you would like. Dislike it if you dislike it. Thank you so much for listening. Till next time, I'm Tanner, and for now, I am done talking. Thank you very much.